Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Thinking Athlete podcast. My guest this time is Ben Esgro, who is a renowned powerlifting coach as well as the founder of his own supplement company. We were discussing his training methodology that at the time was considered a bit too much, but I think Ben does a great job explaining the rationale behind it. Okay, so I think I'd love to start off with an introduction. Since you are kind of a new face and someone in the Israeli fitness community that's not very hardcore.
Yep, sure. So do you want me to kind of explain my background and my stuff, or?
Whatever you think is relevant to the conversation. Just go at it.
Okay, so I guess I'll just tell a little bit of my story in fitness. I started competing as a bodybuilder, or really getting interested in fitness as a bodybuilder around 18, which is I'm 34 now, so it was a while ago. And for me, my personal journey started online as well. But at that time, it was very different. It was actually forums as opposed to now, things like social media. And I think the irony is many people are probably familiar with a lot of the names that were actually all on forums at that time. It was actually bodybuilding.com had a forum. And so many people now who are sort of like the who's who of fitness were on there. That's like Eric Helms, Lane Norton, Alberto Nunez, pretty much everybody. I wouldn't be surprised if Jason was on there too. So that community, it's funny because that was the community before it became the community now, as it is. And I just went there for a lot of information and resources, because what's available now was not nearly, it wasn't like that at all. It was basically magazines, internet forums, men's health, and whatever you could find. And there was slowly this renaissance of sort of evidence-based fitness starting at that point in time. And honestly, Lane was probably a very pivotal figure in influencing a lot of people to pursue exercise science, physiology, all aspects of that to a greater higher education degree. He was a big reason why I went back, or why I went for my master's in sports nutrition. He did his PhD in protein metabolism. I followed along that whole journey all the way back from the beginning at bodybuilding.com. Then I started to transition into powerlifting sort of throughout that. When I got into powerlifting, I realized I made much better gains as a powerlifter. I learned a lot more about training. I kind of got addicted. I built my own gym. I bought an accelerometer so I could track all of my data in training. I basically fully just dove in as an experimentalist. And you'll see that theme sort of throughout my life is any opportunity I have where I can measure and track and try to come to some conclusions, I will take that opportunity. So all along this time, I was also a massive supplement consumer. So I was buying and keeping a list of all the supplements that worked, and then kind of comparing across labels what ingredients were in the ones that I liked and which ones weren't. And then I started sourcing individual raw materials and slowly started making my own supplements, really just for myself and a small group of friends. And basically throughout that time, I haven't really been out of school for any longer than 2 years. And when I am, I get kind of panicked because I feel like I'm losing information out of my brain. So it's been over a decade. I've been a competitive both powerlifter and bodybuilder, and really been intimately involved in the community. And for 9 years, I've owned De Novo, the supplement company. So hopefully that gave a pretty decent background. I tried to keep it fairly brief, but encompass as much as I could in there.
Yeah. Okay. And I'd love to hear a bit more about your early experience in coaching powerlifting.
Yeah, I totally forgot about mentioning coaching. So coaching actually happened pretty early on. While I was doing my bachelor's in nutrition, um, I started to take some local clients who were friends, basically just asked for advice. And that was largely for bodybuilding. So I actually was also a bodybuilding coach to start in the beginning. And then I think really where that changed, and it was my opportunity to sort of what I feel like pay back the debt that I felt from everything I had learned from Lane and everything I appreciated, is I actually started coaching him for powerlifting. Um, and he had a very successful run. He got second at Worlds. This was 2014, I believe. And really from that point, I started to become more prominent as a powerlifting coach, because at that point there were no Americans, especially in the 93, who were really cracking a top three on the world level. And he was getting stronger really fast, and I think opening up a lot of eyes. And really since then, powerlifting has mutated. But I've been lucky enough to, I think, run with a lot of momentum from the success with Lane to now 4 or 5 other people who have won world championships, and multiple people who have won national championships. And really through all of that, I met Jason, then got integrated with TSG. So yeah, it's been a hell of a ride. I'm probably going to forget a lot more things along the way, like I did in the beginning.
That's all right. And what do you think that was the key to Lane's success? Because I've noticed that he posted recently about the competition, that you guys ran into some serious problems.
Yeah.
Uh, as well, he wasn't really expected, was really expected to be someone who gets one of the 3 top spots.
Yep. I think it's a lot of things. I think some I can take some credit for. I think a lot is a credit to him and his approach and his attitude. I mean, one thing is he's willing to do whatever it took, training wise, and we did really push him, like to a point that I think most of the people just would have just mentally given up. So I think he's very resilient. Once he knows that this is the thing that's going to work, he's 100% committed. And we trained very hard. Like, I don't know how familiar people are with programs like Smolov and the higher level Shiko trainings. So they became almost like mutations of Smolov progression schemes and stuff like that, at sometimes higher frequencies, higher volumes, because that worked really well for him coming into us training. And I think one of the things that's interesting with him and I was that a lot of the things that worked well for both of us seemed to be the same. So I respond really well to high volume, high frequency, and so did he. So I think from my experimentation, I was able to take a lot of things that I learned and apply it directly to him. And it became a very potent learning, I think, experience for both of us. But also, I think it was also very gratifying in that whenever I'd have a hunch or a hypothesis that where there wasn't any kind of published literature that I could find, I would basically challenge him in training with it and see if we would make progress or not. And he just continued to progress. So I think he was it's a testament to him that that he is a scientist. So he understood the necessity of sticking to protocol and being diligent with it, because he had to do it in his PhD. So I think that made him very adherent as well to the programming. So I knew if something was going wrong, it was definitely something with the programming, not something where he was screwing up my intervention. So I think it's a lot of things. Like, I think those are a few of them. But on the programming end, definitely the volume and frequency was a huge part of it. And then I think on his end, his ability to stick to protocol and trust the process.
Now, the main talking point that I wanted to bring up is work capacity, and I wanted to mention the story that Jason talked about his uh, fiasco, or if you would say disappointment in Belarus, along with Taylor Atwood. But before that, I'd love to hear about how you guys started working together and what is your job being a strategist for the Strength Guys meet.
So I met Jason through actually, the story is really funny. At nationals in, I think it was the next year after Finland, after Lane got second in Finland, nationals was in my hometown in Scranton. And interestingly, that was the point really when you felt powerlifting becoming almost like viral. Like the attendance at nationals went from 300 to like 1200 in 1 year, which is a huge boost. And so it was a big meet. There was a lot of spectators. There was a lot of well-known fitness people competing, and there was a lot of changing of the guard that happened with top powerlifters. And Jason, I had known him pretty much through. I had known of TSG. I had known him through the internet coming into the meet. And Taylor was one of our athletes for De Novo. So we were there back in the warm-up room, and basically we just wanted to be there for our athletes. So we went back and we were talking with Jason and Taylor during warm-ups and stuff, and basically just let them know that, you know, we're available if we could do anything to help. So I pretty much stayed back there and just, you know, talked with them and did anything I could while he was warming up. And then while I think it was during his third squat, he kind of tweaked his back, Taylor this is, and because I've had quite a laundry list of injuries, I'm very familiar with back injuries. I was able to offer some help in terms of getting him as much as I could within a small time frame, sort of back in the right frame of mind, and kind of assessing whether it was a serious back injury or whether it was just sort of like a strain. So he ended up winning nationals. He ended up being able to finish the meet, of course. And it was sort of a bonding experience between all of us. And Jason was very appreciative. Taylor was very appreciative. And it was cool. It was a great story. And it was also, for me, incredible to watch an athlete like that, because no one ever saw this. But in the warm-up room, Taylor was warming up with like 225 pounds on deadlift, and he actually passed out at the top. I don't know if that was because of pain, if that was what, but I was like, how is this guy going to finish the meet? He literally just passed out lifting, 25% of his 1RM. And yeah, it was amazing to watch him come back and finish that meet and sort of grit through it and everything. So at the end of the day, Jason and I were talking, and I basically just said to him, like, I don't know at what point in life, but at some point we will work together in some capacity beyond this, because we both had such a good experience with it. And I think we meshed really well personality wise. So we ended up doing a seminar together. And then after the seminar, we just sort of stayed in contact. Jason helped a little bit with De Novo graphic stuff, because he's also skilled with graphic design. And then after the Belarus thing, he reached out and just called me just to talk to me, as just from my perspective as a friend. And basically what I said to him is, why don't we just do this together? At that point, I had really started to transition out of coaching a little bit, and I was taking over more of the responsibilities of De Novo, and it just seemed logical to me. I felt like I could help, and I was very willing to. I was already familiar with Taylor from that experience, and he was familiar with me. So it just made sense, and I think we were able to accomplish many of the things that we set out to from that first call.
Mm-hmm. Now, he mentioned that his strategy coming into Belarus was emphasizing Taylor's recovery. meaning a recovered athlete is going to be an athlete that's going to perform well. And from what I understood, that the shift when he brought you in was the emphasis towards work capacity and increasing his conditioning so he can do more volume, more frequency, and just generally withstand more work. Uh, how do you think that's what came into your mind, especially at a time where people were talking more about low frequency stuff and just deadlifting once a week and
Yeah.
all that other bro
Yeah.
science, you can say?
I think I think a very simple one sentence response to that is I'd say if you're well recovered, you're not adapting. Adaptation is not comfortable. It's not meant to be, and there's no facet. This is outside of even training. You could think of anything where if you're adapting, it's an uncomfortable process. That means learning a difficult concept. That means playing music. That means something physical like powerlifting or bodybuilding. Adaptation means that you have to push yourself beyond the point that your body wants to keep you, and that necessitates. It doesn't mean you have to, go out and crush yourself. There's a balance within that, but if you are maximizing recovery, that inherently means you are minimizing adaptation. So I think starting with that philosophy, I think I learned that practically a lot from the programming that I did, and the things that I made the best progress from in my own training, which were programs that broke the rules of that time, where there'd be the quintessential programs that are overtraining. And I think what I was learning practically in the gym of everything I was doing myself, and then whenever I dig down deeper or speak to anybody who was actually a researcher in the lab doing stuff, like one of my friends, Mike Zordos, I was finding that there was actually a lot of data to support what I was doing, and not so much what the current accepted paradigm was of what works in training. Because like you said, at that time it was very much low frequency. If you get weaker on testing, take another week off, take 2 weeks off, because you're not super compensated, or because you're overtrained or something, or your nervous system isn't firing correctly or something. And I think that stuff never made much sense to me, because we are built to adapt and survive. Like literally, if it took you 2 weeks to recover from one bout of lifting, you'd be one of the most inefficient machines that there is. So it never made sense to me. And like I said, as soon as I pushed harder in training, and I mean, I pushed myself harder than I ever did to anybody else, because I wanted answers. And it was even up to the point of like, Mike and I would actually sort of challenge each other with these ridiculous training splits. And at one point we both went up to doing, Mike was working up to squat maxes twice a day for like 2 months. And then I was working up to training maxes every day on all 3 lifts for 2 months. And basically we were just looking at the data and seeing what happened, because there was nothing for that at that time. And funny enough, I think most people would hear that and be like, you're going to get weaker. Like you're going to, like, everything's going to go haywire and terrible. And that never happened. So I think we are still seeing, even when you step back and watch powerlifting now as it mutates into what it's become, along with these raising totals, what you're also seeing are very comparatively extreme forms of intervention that the top coaches are taking. And I say comparatively is an important word there, because compared to before, where people would be very afraid to train the bench press more than 2 times a week or something because you'd overtrain. Now there's people who are benching 4 days a week, 5 days a week, 6 or 7 days a week. And a lot of it actually happens to be a lot of the top athletes are doing that. Or they're using some variation of applying the central tenets of adaptation, which are specificity, volume, and basically, you know, keeping things intense enough throughout the training cycle, especially as you get close to meets. So yeah, it's been interesting to step back and watch, but at the same time, it's also gratifying because it's like, okay, something changed here, and I was part of that change in the beginning, and I'm happy to see it almost being built out more and more now.
Mm-hmm. And now, when you talked about trying to push yourself, where do you find the line between pushing yourself right enough and too much, leaving you just burned out?
So I think you will experience psychological burnout in a training cycle that is still effective, that is not excessive. So I think that's to be expected, because any athlete who's training really hard, they're going to have points where they question it, where they do feel psychological burnout to some point. I think the points where that are really the red flags and the warning signs are when you have aching joints, tissues that is getting worse, not better. You're getting clear signs of dysfunctional adaptation, which are things like, again, you know, joint pain where it locks up, where over time you're actually getting more inhibited rather than less. Obviously, you know, muscle injuries like tears or stuff like that, or tendonitis. But yeah, I don't. The psychological aspect, like I said, I expect someone to be challenged in training. I don't so much think that that's a red flag, but I think it's more so, and then in the data, in their performance data. So really what I'm looking at is this person, and this is what Jason and I collectively looked at as well, is this person actually getting stronger when we test the system? Meaning, when we assess their performance, what's happening over time? And we're not looking at, you know, 1 week and then saying, oh my God, things went down or didn't change in 1 week. Let's completely reinvent the wheel. It's the trend line over time. And it's just like anything. Like if you watched the stock market, you can panic in 1 day and say, I'm going to sell off my whole portfolio, and then lose all your money. And then 2 weeks later, it's back up and higher. So you know, adaptation is very similar. It's non-linear. You hope the trend line is linear, but at any, you know, small cross section of time, you will see points where it's very erratic. It's very erratic.
Mm-hmm. And when you talked about when you feel joint pain or any tissue pain, do you sometimes utilize things like that stray away from specificity into more of a general preparedness type stuff? If, say, someone is getting shoulder pain in the bench press, maybe moving him into a dumbbell neutral press or something like that. How far do you usually stray for a competitive athlete for that?
So the goal is always to keep it close to again, never stray too far from the concept of specificity. So if we have to change, we're always going to change to the thing that is closest to what is the competitive movement, that has the highest carryover to the competitive movement. I think we were lucky in TSG that they have a staff physical therapist. There was always someone in the network I could reach out to get advice on that as well. But typically in programming, whenever something goes or happens that was not so predictable, it starts this cascade of questions. And that's always the first response. I think that's important to mention, is that it's not so much, okay, you had this nagging, let's just say, you know, tendonitis on your pec attachment. Well, let's just automatically change it. It starts the questions of, okay, let me see the video assessment. How are you moving under load? tell me how it feels and where it hurts, at what point in the movement, at what point in the, total movement of the, eccentric, concentric. Maybe we could change the grip a little bit. Maybe we can change the exercise. So I think it really starts, and it's an important opportunity to question the athlete and see where you can go and what changes you can make before you just automatically, make an adjustment or change. So hopefully that answers your question.
Mm-hmm. And bringing it back to work capacity, how do you go about trying to increase it? Because obviously when you get a new athlete, sometimes I'd say maybe they can't really handle the amount of volume that you want to bring them up to. How would you gradually turn them into something like a Taylor Atwood?
So the best analogy I can use is a process that is superficial and you can see it happening. Because I think that takes a concept that seems a little bit abstract and makes it a lot more understandable. And that is the adaptation of just changing your skin and getting a tan. So I think it's an appropriate analogy for many reasons when you're talking about muscle adaptation as well. It is a form of tissue. It responds to stressor, and it responds to stressor with a very specific form of adaptation. And everybody has a baseline of where they're starting from and how much of a change they can get before something bad happens. So that's true of muscle tissue. We know not everybody will respond the same to the same intervention and get the same magnitude of change. So let's say we have someone who's very fair-skinned, and our goal is to get them as dark as we can without having them burn their skin. It's the same thing. If you were running a tanning salon and that was your goal for this person, what you do is you'd slowly expose them to increasing amounts of UV radiation. And you would watch and see and assess whether or not they're burning or they're having any adverse events. Each time you do it, you'd give them enough of a window to try to recover from it. And then as soon as they've recovered, you'd present the stressor again in a controlled dose. But you're never really stepping back the dose. Again, the point over time is to get them adapted to a higher threshold of the stressor more and more. And ideally, what you do is you'd work within the framework of that individual's ability. So the same thing is true of prescribing loading to any individual in training. Is some people automatically, yes, they can handle more in the beginning than others. Does that mean because they can handle more that you should throw the entire, like okay, they can handle more, let's just open the floodgates? No, and that's why, again, the UV radiation exposure is a good example. Is just because someone can handle a lot doesn't mean they should just stay out in the sun all day. Like even dark skin can burn. So the same thing is true of muscle. Is you can do too much even if you have an incredible work capacity. But the point over time is always to control the exposure, and then it's basically control the exposure for a short period of time. In training, this could be 2 weeks, this could be 4 weeks. Assess what's going on and then adjust based on that. So that's largely what we do in training. Is when I was on my own before I was with Jason, I would do 1 week periods of time where I'd prescribe the intervention and then I'd assess every week. And I found that window was too frequently. It was too frequently for two reasons. One is that people, they could get stronger within the week, but the intensity was too high and it was leading to more injuries than it was reward. And then extending it out a little bit longer just seemed to be a more sustainable strategy, where the risk of injury went down, and we were still able to grasp enough of, is this block working enough? Do we need to change much? Because one of the things you might find is that okay, this person's getting stronger. That's great. I'm getting the desired response. That means I don't need to increase the stressor. So we wouldn't. If we found that we're getting the desired effect from this prescribed training load, keep it the same until it doesn't work anymore. Like if it's not broke, don't fix it. But I think there's always this sort of feed forward desire to, it's almost a panic or an anxiety of, I'm not getting as strong as I possibly can. So let me, if it's good now, let me try to make it better. And then it very quickly becomes too much. And again, that's very similar to the analogy with the sun, is like, if you're super light skinned and you want to, get super dark, if you just stay out in the sun one day, all day, it's not going to work out well.
Yeah. And is the search for the more optimal or better approach something that you see from your athletes as well? Meaning, if they want to use, if you ask them to use the same loading or something like that, they just want to push it harder and harder. How do you handle those people?
So I really think that question is you're touching on what's at the heart of coaching. And I think that there's two things that are big to it. One is that the buy-in is very important for the athlete. They need to trust that you're not just making up something and telling them or purposely holding them back from making their best gains or something. And I found over time that if you don't have that buy-in, your ability to be effective, no matter how great or perfect on paper your strategy is, if you don't have that buy-in, it's going to impair your ability to really be an effective coach. And then I think, there's time, that there is building a relationship and that trust with each person that you're writing this intervention for. Because if you're asking them to do something extreme and they don't believe in it, there's a lot higher chance that they're either not going to follow it or they're just going to half-ass it or something. So I think there's that end of it. And then I think, the other end is not treating them as if they're just sort of a pawn in your ability to cultivate a world champion, but actually trying to explain to them what's going on and why you're doing it. Not just saying, hey, you're doing 40% more sets this week because it's going to work. Do you want to be world champion or not? And then on the inverse side, touching on what you said, where if maybe they're asking, maybe they're coming to you and saying, I want to do 40% more because I want to be world champion. You need to see the opportunity as a coachable moment there and to explain to them, this may not be best for you and why. And I think we've had that at multiple points, both in my career as an independent coach and then with Jason. And I think part of our ability to be effective has been in being able to communicate that, in not just that we're doing something and that you should blindly trust it, but why we're doing it, and then backing it up. So not just writing the intervention and saying follow it, but once, like, letting them see this is why we did that. Now that you've seen it, again, all these things lead towards better buy-in over time, because you've made a promise to someone, and then once it's happened in reality, you've kept that promise. And I find that you gain tremendous momentum psychologically with your athletes if you can keep your promises.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to touch on the opposite end of the spectrum, since I'm noticing this is sort of a recurrent pattern. I want to touch on data gathering and what you're doing with your athletes to actually monitor training, because what I'm noticing from a lot of coaches is even if they do gather data, they're just not doing anything with it. And then it's just a bunch of paper or a bunch of spreadsheets filled with useless information. So how do you usually get to the point that you're actually practically using it?
So that's a huge point. And I actually discussed that at length with Mike Teixeira as well. And I think what's happened in the coaching community is people see something working and everybody sort of wants a piece of the pie. And what that causes is everybody says, well, this person is winning worlds or has successful athletes and they're tracking data, so I need to be tracking data. But the part that's being missed is if you don't know, like you said, how to interpret that data and apply those findings with your data, I would argue it's probably better for you not to track data if because it's just going to actually be misleading for you. So I think it starts with first principles. So what that means is you need to understand what are the main underpinnings that drive adaptation. And again, as I said before, that's volume, that's frequency, that's intensity. And that needs to all be kept in the concept of specificity. So what does that mean in a very practical, straightforward example? That means that you need to track someone's weekly volume on a measurable thing that is consistent. So let's say you're tracking the sets and reps and intensity, because that's what the equation for volume dictates, on back squat and then leg press. Well, the problem is you're not really getting, you're producing a lot of variance in tracking volume for that, because you have two lifts that are not the same. So the carryover is not the exact same. So my argument is for a power lifter, you should only be tracking the most specific movements. And that would be back squat, competition back squat, because you will always get the highest return on time, on investment for the competition lift, because we are talking about powerlifting here. So you'd be tracking volume in that. I would start there for most practical aspects. I do think over time, and one thing Jason and I did was we did start to track the volume of everything, but I think that can be very noisy if you're not ready for it in the beginning. So first start with the power lifts, and only track the back squat. And that's going to open up a whole key of answers for you, because what you're going to find is there is this correlation between how much I manipulate someone's volume and what happens to their strength level. So I'd start at the most simple level like that. And then as you get more refined and you start questioning these relationships, what you'll be able to do then is play with, okay, well, if 10,000 is 10,000 pounds of volume the same as, is 10,000 pounds of volume at 80% of 1 rep max the same as 10,000 pounds of volume at 90% of 1 rep max? The answer is no. But like basically what I'm giving you is I'm giving you the process of how I learned also to track this data and to apply it. So I think having it be this slow, methodical process of where you collect a little bit of data, enough that you're comfortable and ready to process, and use that data to ask some more questions and then test it. It's basically applying the scientific method. Generate a hypothesis from your data, test that hypothesis, and then develop a new intervention off of that. So I think you can get very sophisticated, but starting off with those most fundamental things, which is first specificity, then looking at volume, tracking volume of the main lifts, looking at frequency. Even if you're tracking volume of the main lifts and you're increasing frequency, you will still you will catch any changes in volume just because you're tracking volume. Meaning, like if you do 5 sets of 5 on squat on Monday, 5 sets of 6 on Wednesday, 5 sets of 7 on Friday, if you're tracking volume, you will grasp all of that within the weekly volume. And then make sure you track intensity, because like I said, one of the rules of specificity that it dictates is the higher intensity you get, the more carryover you have to 1RM strength. That's why typically as you're peaking someone for a competition, you will see intensity gets closer towards the meet. Now some people have sort of hijacked that, but that's maybe another question.
Yeah, I think that the most valuable thing in tracking the accessory lifts, meaning if you compare again the leg press and the squat, is to somehow try to manage the volume of the same types of movements or similar types of movements to avoid overuse injuries, or maybe even to pinpoint a problem in the technique, meaning if someone is consistently getting stronger in the leg press, but just his squat numbers aren't moving, maybe there's a technique issue or anything like that that we can start looking over there, because he's probably gaining leg strength. Do you agree with
Yeah,
that?
I definitely don't think it's I don't think it's useless to track volume for other lifts. I just think, like I said, it's important to control your exposure to the overwhelming amount of data to start.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's valuable. I mean, I think the more things you can track, as long as you understand what you're tracking and what you plan on doing with it, the better. It's just that at some point it can become an overwhelming amount and make you more confused than give you answers. But yeah, I think the angle I'd approach that is I actually think tracking overall volume is more important for hypertrophy, like on the accessory lifts or other lifts, whereas tracking just the main lifts is more important for strength.
Mm-hmm. I gotcha. Now, I want to backtrack way back to the start of the conversation and when you talked about when you met Jason and Taylor, and you offered to coach Taylor alongside with Jason. I wanted to hear about your experience about co-coaching, because that's something that's kind of not very popular, but I see that you guys are doing a great job with it.
Yeah, to me, I think I still believe that that's the way forward, because I do think I don't think any man's an island, and I do think that collaboration. You see this in any type of real dramatic advancement in any fields. Like, for example, they call it the lone genius myth in research and in science, and very rarely the people that are credited for these world-changing discoveries, very rarely have they done it in isolation. They're usually collaborating with other academics, other researchers, other assistants and students. And the reality is that it does make you better. It challenges your concepts. It challenges your theories. And I think iron sharpens iron. I think that you need to be able to defend your hypotheses and hold them up to scrutiny if they're actually going to be anything worthwhile. So I think it's very hard because I think there's this temptation. Number one, financially, you definitely make more as an individual coach. I think the other thing is a lot of people want to, everyone loves their own brand, so to speak. So I think everybody wants to take a lot of the glory from themselves, for themselves. So, and I understand that. I think it would have been very hard for me to do the co-coaching before I did the independent coaching. So for me, I got to taste a lot of those things, and then sort of as time went on, I found that I wanted more so to be more impactful than I did want to take all the glory. So it just made sense. And then I think it's just like any kind of relationship or marriage of sorts, is that you need to find somebody that there is mutual respect with, that you get along with, and that you can work with very, very productively. And all those things were there. So I think that's why it made it such a natural choice. I don't think I would have been able to co-coach with everybody. And that's partly, do the philosophies align enough too? Like if I was sitting in a meeting where I'm still trying to convince somebody that, volume and frequency are important, that's probably not going to be a good relationship, because, that's not going to work out. So, yeah, I really think I think that's something that TSG does great, because it's a broad multinational network. And I also think that I still think it's going to be the way forward, because everybody has different skill sets and different things that they're great at. Like, I don't believe I'm the best handler in the world in terms of I'm good at picking attempts, but I'm not great at looking at the board and making these like rapid and analytical decisions of, I need to put this to put 2 kilos over this person, blah, blah. And some people are better at that than me. So having that network on meet day and stuff like that, it's great. It helps you spread the burden across a group rather than just take it all on yourself.
Mm-hmm. I think that a company that does it best and shows that it indeed is the way forward is WeWork, that built a
Yeah.
huge company over that exact concept.
Yep. Yeah. I think being able to let somebody, it's specialization. I mean, there's a reason that you think about it in terms of careers. There's a reason that you will get paid more in a career if you are a specialist in one very, very specific niche thing versus if you just know how to do a little bit of building, a little bit of engineering, a little bit of many things. You're rewarded much better for specialization. And the reason for that is if you have multiple people under one roof who are all really good at one thing really specifically, and then they combine those really high level talents, you get groundbreaking things.
Mm-hmm. Now, as we talked before the recording, I wanted to finish off with the question about your academic background, and specifically as it relates to your coaching career. How do you think that these two kind of merge together? Because I know that it's not really directly related to each other.
Yeah, I think most people who would look at me in terms of credentials would think that I am an academic and I love academia, and that's actually not true. For me, I would say more so that I recognize the value in education. I recognize the value in academia. I think there are many inefficiencies of it. So my encouragement for anybody who's a coach, who's really having this internal debate over whether or not they should do more schooling or do more education or blah, 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 at this point is don't look at it as I have to do this thing. I don't like this aspect of these courses or this information. I have found in my own journey that the more that you challenge yourself to make a bridge between concepts that seem unbridgeable, the more potent you become in terms of your knowledge and your ability to apply the knowledge. And I found that here's an ironic example of that is I remember when I was doing my undergrad in nutrition, I was taking a community nutrition class and I hated it. And I sat there and I didn't want to be there, and I didn't think I'd ever need to understand the importance of nutritional requirements for pregnancy and nutritional requirements for infants. And lo and behold, the first job I get out of undergrad is a community nutrition job. I need to counsel women on how to breastfeed. I need to counsel women who are pregnant on proper eating and nutrition for pregnancy. I need to counsel kids on childhood nutrition. So things do tend to actually come up that you don't think will ever be relevant. And then even another thing in nutrition is I had a management course where we had to talk about reorder points and inventory management and do all these calculations. And this was for my RD. And I'm doing it and I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, I don't want to be doing this. Lo and behold, I use reorder point all the time in the business for de novo. So I think you get what you put in, essentially. And you can see them as two very independent things, meaning the practical world of coaching and academia. And if you see them that way, they very much will be that way. If you can actually see the bridge between both of them, I also think if you see them as a bridge, you can create a bridge between them. And I think if there's anything I've done well with academia and practical application, it's creating bridges between fields and programs and courses that maybe, I don't know, to the layperson or the average person just aren't there. And that's what I love. I see going and taking a course as your ability to extract as much applicable information from that and apply it to your thing that you want to do with it as you can.
I'd love to elaborate a bit on that and say that I think that our earlier point about data gathering is also something that you probably learned a lot more, and how to do it in a really quality fashion due to your academic background. But then again, I think that there's a difference between if you would have went to study something like, I don't know, philosophy, that would probably not be applicable at all to your actual job as a coach.
So definitely, I totally agree with that. I think that it's very easy to sometimes forget that you, despite whether you think it or not, you have been trained in certain things. Whether like you said, I have had statistics courses, and I don't see myself as a statistician, but I probably have a lot more knowledge of statistics than an average person who never, had to be exposed to those courses. But I will say this, I think desire is a big part of that equation, in that now there is so much opportunity for free education on YouTube. On MIT has open courseware. Coursera, you can take courses for free. These are all things that I utilize myself. Like, just because I really don't believe just because you have a couple letters after your name, that makes you educated. That means you've done what you needed to get those letters. It doesn't mean that you're competent necessarily. It means you've reached a minimum level of competence in things. And that also doesn't mean you can't become competent in those things if you don't have those letters. Like, for example, my coursework for pharmaceutical chemistry, it was online. So for me, I had to bridge that gap and actually learn a lot of applied techniques myself. So I bought glassware and I watched reactions and I learned how to do it. So it's not unattainable. You just have to sometimes build your own path towards getting there. And again, like I said, there are so many creators in every possible field. Like, last night, I literally watched a PhD who discovered the mTOR pathway talk about for 3 hours across 3 lectures how he discovered it, the whole story of mTOR, the entire pathway. And I think what's incredible about that is, like, 10 years ago, you would have had to be an attendee at this very prestigious university to have access to that information. Now you just need an internet connection.
Yeah. And I think that you bring up an important point that was in an earlier episode of the podcast, but it was in Hebrew. So I think that's good that you brought that up. Is that sometimes indeed that the fact that you have a degree in a certain field doesn't make you an expert, and that you continuously have to grow and evolve with the field, and not just, you got that degree in 1995 and you stayed with the exact same knowledge base since then. As well as, unfortunately, when people fall into gimmicks, there are enough RDs around here that for some reason don't think that a caloric deficit is a thing. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. That's a really important point, and the fact that anybody can do it is definitely, I'd say, motivational, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and that it should be inspirational for sure. Like, it should make you say, this is attainable. You don't have to, there doesn't have to be anything special about you other than desire and curiosity. I think it's funny because that's where I saw it from the inside out too, is a lot of my coursework in my undergrad for nutrition, I'd be listening to professors teach about, nutrition fundamentals. And it was the complete opposite in many ways of things that I knew were happening and being published at that time. And you realize that, number one, professors and PhDs are people. People have opinions. People have biases. And then I think the other thing is that just because you're a teacher or just because you have this credential, again, kind of like you alluded to, it doesn't mean that you can just rest on that credential and then stop reading or keeping up on stuff for 20 years and think that the information hasn't changed. And that, I think that's one of the things that I saw is nutrition at that time, I don't know if it's changed now, was very guilty of that. Like still very heavily low fat, high carbohydrate diet across the board for everybody. There are no extenuating circumstances where that won't apply. Let's treat cancer with a high carbohydrate thing in medical nutrition. And it's like, yeah. So, it's eye-opening, but I think that taught me very early on to, I think I also have a tendency to question authority, but it taught me very early on.
I can relate.
Yeah, that I shouldn't just obey, that I should find a lot of these answers out for myself, and it's my responsibility to do that.
Mm-hmm. All right. So to summarize, I just wanted to get some of your closing thoughts. And if you want to talk about any upcoming projects or anything that you that we might be looking into in the near future from you, as well as how can people contact you and maybe get your services or anything like that.
So best place now to reach out to me is probably just Instagram. It's just at Ben Esgro. That's probably the most convenient for most people at this point. I think summary is really don't give up on yourself. So if you want to learn something, reach out to people that come on the podcast, reach out to anybody that you can find within your grasp, reach out to me. People, for the most part, are willing to help someone who's motivated. So don't give up on educating yourself and looking for answers and finding them yourself. Don't be so dependent on everybody else to sort of spoon feed them to you. I also think if you are a powerlifting coach, again, keep investing in yourself and learning. Focus on the first principles or central tenets, like I talked about. Find people who are doing what you want to do in that field, and either reach out to them or follow along. Use them as a motivator, kind of going forward. And I think the last thing is, just keep going. I think that's just the very simplest thing I could say is don't limit yourself. If you really want something, it's probably a lot more attainable than you think, as long as you're willing to commit to it. In terms of projects, I'm more heavily based on the supplement side right now. I do have a project that I can't talk about much, but people should follow along. Either my Instagram or the De Novo Instagram, which is just at De Novo Sups. And within the next 2 months, they will see what I'm referring to right now.
All right, cool. So thank you for being a guest on the podcast, and I really appreciate your time, and I hope we can do this again soon.
Anytime, man. Thank you for having me.